Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome into GC Live Talking Tuesday. It is January 16th, 2024. And as we kick this show off, there is a new welcome home that has gone public. He's Intern Joe. I'm Mike. You appreciate you guys tuning in today as we do all year round. We talk Gamecock football, and with the transfer portal, NIL, everything else in between, despite the fact South Carolina not making it to a bowl game this past year, there has been nothing short but plenty of headlines to talk about with Gamecock football. And Intern Joe, we've discussed this a lot this offseason, and even going back towards the end of the year, talking about the importance of being able to create competition in that room for quarterback. For South Carolina, being able to bring in some type of experience, right? Some type of experience was going to be key. Now, being able to bring in Robbie Ashford, former Auburn quarterback, played there for 2 years. Prior, he was at Oregon. The stat sheet might not necessarily blow people away, especially when you talk about bringing in a transfer quarterback that you've had here for the last couple of years in Spencer Rattler, before, of course, now declaring for the NFL draft. But he has some type of experience, and we'll get into it a little bit more. Clearly not South Carolina's first option because, well, a couple weeks back, A.J. Swan, that was one of their key guys that they're going after first. And, of course, he decided to decommit from South Carolina verbally. So I bring that up not to be negative about the kid, but it's just trying to be realistic. Having said all that, though, they land a quarterback. What's your initial thoughts on the pickup?
Yeah, I think the pickup's good, right, Mike? We've been talking all offseason about who are they going to add in the quarterback room. It comes up every single show we're on, seemingly. Well, now you know. You also add Davis Bevel, as a preferred walk-on. So the quarterback room is restocked for the most part. I don't think they're going to go get another guy for that quarterback room. But you have, Lenore Sellers, Luke Doty, Robbie Ashford, and then Dante Reno, and then as well Davis Bevel. You've got, a quarterback room that's restocked going into spring football. So that question mark is, now taken care of, and there's less things to worry about on the offseason agenda.
Yeah, and I wrote a piece recently. If you guys have been following along on Gamecock Central for subscribers, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, take advantage of signing up today for just $1 for the first month on Gamecock Central. But we've been doing this series, and we've been giving you a positional breakdown from room to room about what the early breakdowns will look like for South Carolina's 2024 roster. Did the quarterback room very early. We knew there was going to be some type of changes, but it's the offseason mode, right? And like we mentioned, not going to a bowl game, there's plenty of things to talk about, especially at that point. Things started picking up the last couple of weeks. But having said all that, we did an updated version on that today. So you can head on over to Gamecock Central. You can find that there. But the thing about Ashford, I just really want to throw this out here about some of the things about this guy, because maybe for some of you, you've been following along over on Gamecock Central. You have a better idea of who this young man is. But maybe you don't. So we'll get you caught up to speed if you don't. A couple things to know about Ashford. As I mentioned, over at Auburn the last 2 years. Before that, though, he started his career at Oregon. And Intern Joe, you might be a little young for this. I'm sure you've heard the school, but I don't know if you ever saw the show, Two-A-Days, which was a high school series they did on MTV back in the day on Hoover High. So he went to Hoover. He played at Hoover. That's where Ashford played some high school ball at. So I bring those things up. Because he is someone that when you watch his tape and you look at the statistics over the last 2 years, he's a dual threat guy. I think he's more complementary to what Sellers' game is like. I think Sellers can throw the football better than Ashford, as in the short sample size that we've seen. I think the big question with Ashford is going to be his decision-making, being able to protect the football, right? Because as we head into this competition between Sellers, Reno, and Ashford, and no disrespect against Bevel, we can throw him in there if you want, but clearly, you would give the advantage to Sellers as of today. I think some people look at this move and they'll just assume, all right, now he's going to be a backup here. He might. But here's a guy that has experience of starting in the SEC. If you think Robbie Ashford just coming here with the notion that, man, I'm just going to come here and be a backup, you are very, very, very mistaken. Now, could it play out that way? Do a lot of people probably think that? Do I think Sellers will be the week 1 starter? Sure. But don't just look at Robbie Ashford as someone that's going to come in here with the mindset of, I'm just going to be grabbing a clipboard. That's not the case. I feel like I've seen way too much of that over the last couple of weeks. Saw that a little bit today. And I know it's just the portion. It's just the portion. But if there's a couple people that think that, I'm sure there's a good amount of people that think that in this fan base. There will be competition. You need competition. We've said this before. Go back to 2020. Go back to 2020 during that offseason. You had a young quarterback who assumed that he was going to have the starting job, and look how that played out. There were certainly a lot of issues with that year's team. There were a lot of issues going on in the world that time period too. But the point being is you need competition. Robbie Ashford will do that. Dante Reno, being here in the spring, he will do that as well. Luke Doty, working with the wide receivers. But you know what? He's also someone that can be an asset for that quarterback room. And quite frankly, God forbid, they don't feel comfortable with the number 2 guy. Who's to say Doty wouldn't be the number 2 again this year like it was last year? So I think more than anything, competition is what we've been talking about a lot, Joe. How much do you think Ashford can provide that competition? And what would be your early assessments of the quarterback room in comparison to, Reno and Sellers and how he will likely blend into that mix?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to create a lot of good competition. We've talked about that you want a guy that, you can't guarantee anyone the starting job, and the guys that, are you are going to, theoretically guarantee the starting job to, aren't going to come here. So I think, with it being as wide open in the search, being wide open as it was, basically your recruiting pitch was come compete. I think Ashford's the guy that the best that you could pull from that situation and with those limitations on your search, right? Because, I mean, Spencer Rattler, when they were recruiting him, he was pretty much a shoe-in for the starting quarterback. I mean, obviously he was going to compete a little bit, but it wasn't the same search for a quarterback in the transfer portal as it is now, because now you have Lenore Sellers, as we've talked about. But I think Ashford, provides a good sense of competition. Dante's going to go in there and compete as well. Learn the game in the SEC and the college game as well. So, fans should be excited about it. Just another guy in there that, can provide competition, push Lenore Sellers a little bit. And I think Ashford's certainly capable of doing that. Right, Mike?
Yeah, we've said this before too. So I apologize for the people that watch our show over and over and over, because you've heard me say this over and over and over. If Lenore Sellers is as talented as many of us believe as he is and can be, adding someone to push him, and we've said this before, regardless of who they brought into the room, right? Look at it as a blank resume, right? Obviously, it's Ashford right now, and I agree with one of the statements you made. I don't anticipate South Carolina adding another quarterback to this room. The only way to me that happens is 2 things. One, there is just a guy out there that is can't miss, whether that be over the next couple of days, which I don't think any of us anticipates. We don't anticipate that. Or after spring football, that second transfer portal window, something crazy happens at a school. And things always happen that are crazy. It feels like in this college football era that we're talking about, especially now that you can enter the portal at any given time. So I bring those things up because, and even if that were to happen, that second scenario I brought up, you'd be bringing in a quarterback that had just missed a whole 6 months, really 7 months of being able to get acclimated with your team. Never mind the fact of missing spring practice, and being able to go out there and run the actual offense for a little bit. But as we mentioned before, there's always outliers, as we saw a couple years back in the scenario that you had with Zeb Nolan, right? Zeb wasn't here in the spring. I mean, Zeb was still playing FCS football before he got here. And then, of course, he was thrown into the mix. But that was a different scenario because of injuries. So I bring those things up, Joe, and I'm going to share this. I'm going to share this today. if you're not a subscriber to Gamecock Central, you wouldn't be seeing this. But if you want to be able to see the breakdown that I have, my week one starter thoughts, all that kind of stuff, we've been doing this position to position, but I'm going to give you a little taste for those of you who aren't subscribers to get to see what I'm talking about. We talk about the quarterbacks in that room, and these are the scholarship guys. I included Doty simply because he has the most experience when you're talking about playing quarterback, especially at South Carolina. So I included him in there. And this isn't a depth chart or anything like that. These are just, the names. This is what you got right now in that quarterback room, scholarship wise, right? So that's why you don't see Bevel up there. No disrespect to Bevel. So I think, look, being able, we talked about the competition side of it. I think more than anything, when you look at this quarterback room, and by the way, as you see right there, Ashford has 2 years of eligibility remaining. Doty, he'll be gone after this year, right? I mean, I have to do some math here now, too. He has 2 years of eligibility left, excuse me. I mean, it feels like he's been here since freaking when I got here in 2016, for crying out loud. He's the new DeCarrion Joyner as far as time goes. But when you look at this, my whole point, Joe, is you have a very young quarterback room that you're going to be working with the next couple of years. Now, this is under the assumption that players won't be transferring out. So obviously things can change. This new era of college football, things change all the time. My whole point being is there's only 3 guys in that room outside of Doty. Of course, will be working with some wide receivers. You're going to have Bevel in that room. These guys are going to have a bunch of opportunities to get a lot of reps this spring. So when I look at a guy like Lenore Sellers, when I look at a guy like Dante Reno, those two in particular, that excites me about the future of Gamecock football. That excites me. Now, again, obviously things change with college football now, right? But if you want to live in a glass half empty world, have at it somewhere else. I mean, I'm not going to be sitting here talking about scenarios that might not happen. If they happen, great. We'll talk about it when a player leaves, if that were to happen. I'm not going to sit here wasting time talking about stuff that hasn't happened. So I say that because Sellers, he needs more experience. Obviously, you would like to see that in the game, but you can't just get that unless, how do you get experience in games? You have to play in the games. Being able to get a bunch of reps this spring, Reno as well. Ashford, I'm interested to see what he can do. When you look at that, though, Joe, what do you expect from a guy like Reno? What do you expect from a guy like Robbie Ashford? We talk a lot about Lenoris, and rightfully so, but what do you expect from these two guys to do in order to challenge Sellers?
I mean, I think you have to come in there and, have the mentality that you are the starter, essentially, right? It's an open competition. They've been talking about it as an open competition. And, you have to go in there and, prove that you're the guy. And I think, even competing for the number 2 slot, like sure, Lenoris has a little bit of favor, but again, it is an open competition. But I think if you go in and compete like you are the starter, you're going to earn that number 2 spot, right? I think Dante has a very good chance to be in that number 2 spot if he comes in and competes. Same thing with Ashford, right?
Yep.
They're both, I guess, at the same stage in terms of what the coaches have seen. Obviously, they're going to favor the recruit a little bit more, but Ashford coming in from the portal, he has experience. So it's going to be an interesting battle for the number 2 slot. Doty also capable of taking reps, but they added Ashford and Bevel as well. So you would assume Doty is going to work more at wide receiver, just athlete and kind of that DK Joyner role. So it'll be really interesting to see. But I think, realistically, Reno and Ashford are playing for the number 2 spot. But again, both of those guys, I mean, at least from my perspective, I think, if they come in and have a good spring, good summer, they could, win that starting job if they put it all together, consistently throughout the spring and the summer. You kind of have to play well throughout both and, guarantee leave no doubt in anyone's mind, essentially, that you are the starting quarterback.
So a couple things to talk about where this puts South Carolina at from a scholarship standpoint. As of right now, the Gamecock Central scholarship counter is not updated as far as, when I say updated, I'm just talking it's one off right now, right? So if you look at it right now, Ashford is not on the list. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because if you look at it, all right, where's Ashford? All right, he's not there. So what that means is this is really an 87 right now, which puts South Carolina 3 over the projected scholarship total for the fall. And I say that because there's players right now that aren't here yet that will be enrolling part of the 2024 class. They're not early enrollees like the Dante Renos of the world, the Dylan Storts, right? Mazio Bennett, just keep going down the list. But you have some players that will be enrolling later on this year, and you will have that number, which again is the projected one. As I've said many times before, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who've been paying attention to college football for a long time, you already know what I'm going to say. These things, when you look at this number, it's crap, okay? It's crap. These things always get taken care of. It always works out. It always works out. So, yes, South Carolina, as of right now, again, if you just tuned in, the scholarship counter on Gamecock Central, it hasn't been updated to 88 now that Ashford has committed to South Carolina, but the Gamecocks are 3 over that limit. What will happen between now and the fall? Well, multiple things can happen, right? I mean, first and foremost, we have the transfer portal, that second window coming up in April. This isn't me saying, okay, Mike knows what's going on as far as there's someone that's thinking about leaving, but as we've mentioned many times before, when it comes to college football, you're constantly having meetings with your positional coaches, head coaches, positional coaches, coordinators, all that stuff. After spring practices, I'm sure there'll be a few players that will look at their roles and they might not be happy with it. This is not just limited at South Carolina. This happens throughout college football. So would I be surprised? Would I be surprised to see a player or two enter the portal after the spring? No, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. If that were to happen, that's going to open up, obviously, a slot or two, depending on how many players enter the portal. In addition to that, there'll be some tinkering around with scholarships to try to find a way to make sure that you get to that 85 limit. So I bring those things up to explain it because it feels like now, ever since South Carolina has gone over that mark, and by the way, Gilbert Edmond is in our system. We have him in there for those of you wondering because they're like, well, maybe that would be 4 over. He's in already. Ashford isn't, but that just happened. They'll be able to get that taken care of. I'm not worried about that. Now, what does that mean from a transfer portal standpoint? Things are really starting to slow down. I think people are starting to see that. You go back to last week, Joe, in a span of, I think it was like 4 days, South Carolina picked up 7 players from the portal. This past week, obviously much slower. Now, there's been 2 welcome homes. One of them now have gone public. That was the Ashford one. Another one is out there still for Beamer. We're trying to confirm whether or not that is for Edmond. I know some people are wondering about that. But we will get that taken care of in a little bit to hopefully clarify for you. But I look at those things and I say, okay, things are starting to slow down. That doesn't surprise me. However, again, and I don't think anticipated being a quarterback, but a quarterback, whoever, South Carolina feels like there was someone out there that is can't miss. I think you have to go find a way to make it happen. You bring them in here. You worry about, like I said, scholarship stuff takes care of itself. It takes care of itself. So I'm not really worried about the scholarship counter right now. I think the only position that worries me a little bit, I guess you could say 2 positions really. You lost some experience at corner. So if you were able to bring in a player from the transfer portal at the cornerback spot, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I wouldn't be opposed to them bringing another player at wide receiver. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. But again, now as we get closer to where we are with the numbers, that's kind of, what where we're at with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mike, you're right. I mean, I think the scholarships will take care of themselves. We're far away from football in the fall, unfortunately. So, that's just the nature of the off season right now. There's going to be some roster confusion. I mean, they'll get it down in time, and we'll have more of an idea. Obviously, as the spring shakes out, once that portal opens and closes as well, heading into summer ball, and it is right around the corner, so not too far away. But yeah, the roster is going to shake up, as we know, especially these last couple of weeks with the portal the way it's been. It's been a lot. So we've been doing some good
I'm Anna
things.
McNaught. Let me show you.
What the heck? Sorry, I apologize. Got a lot of things going on in the background.
So, a couple things too to talk about on today's show, because it feels like a lot has happened since last week's show on Tuesday. There has been some flip-flopping going on with coaching positions. I saw someone asking about Justin Stepp. I'll talk about that in a little bit. There was also a change in how South Carolina goes about their contract approvals in athletics. And I think that created some confusion. I can tell you from our end, it created some confusion. We were not alone, talking to some of my colleagues out there. So I'll explain what I mean by that. And there was also a bonus for a positional coach over the weekend. So first thing I want to start with, Joe, I want to talk about what transpired with some of this contract talk. Because as I've said on this show, as we've talked about on this show with some of the coaches who the impression was their contracts were expiring at the end of the year. What took place over the last, I'd say, 9 months now, go back to last spring, South Carolina did something that was unprecedented. Now, I'm not trying to make it seem like, they reinvented the wheel, they created fire or something like that, but they did something that was very out of the ordinary, something new. A report from the state newspaper outlined how 3 South Carolina assistants who were presumed by everyone, including us, and when I say us, I'm talking all of us at Gamecock Central, Chris, Wes, they've mentioned it. I think actually Chris put out a little story yesterday on Gamecock Central, and he actually specifically said, including us. I know from speaking to colleagues at other outlets, I'll let them throw their own names out there if they want to attach it to it. But we were all under the assumption that they were working under an expired contract that had been expired at the end of the 2023 calendar year. An open records request revealed that Justin Stepp got an extension in March, Luedecke in June, and Traven Robertson had one in August. All those contracts were due to expire after December 31st of 2023. They have now set to expire the same date, but in 2024. So many people are probably going to be wondering, how does this happen? How does this happen when it's not just one person, but multiple outlets? Simple. Contracts that do not exceed a certain amount. And I believe what the state wrote is it's $650,000 or more. If it doesn't exceed that, USC put a new policy in that they don't have to go in front of the board of trustees for approval, and they can be done at the administration athletics level. So bottom line is this. I share this because as confusing as that was for a lot of us, and I'm sure it was confusing for some of you out there as well, that's going to be one of the new things to pay attention to. And I say pay attention to, we don't even get emails about these things. So it's constantly just trying to make sure that and it's not just a football thing. I'm talking basketball, I'm talking baseball, certainly for football, because the amount of money that we're talking about here in comparison to a lot of these other sports, it's usually not going to go under the radar the same way. But now that's something to pay attention to, which to me, and we'll try to gather more information as to why they're doing this, because to me, that just sounds stupid. It really sounds stupid. Why wouldn't you want to publicly acknowledge one of your coaches getting an extension? That helps you from a recruiting standpoint, right? That helps you. Just the perception out there, he's working on an expired contract. So that's just my 2 cents on it. I had never heard of such a thing. I talked to colleagues. I talked to colleagues in different states. They thought it was silly. So again, as dumb as I think that is, we will try to gather more information about it as to why they are doing this. As one person told me the other day, he's like, maybe they're just lazy. They don't want to get out of bed as much. I don't know. We'll figure this out, though, for you. But hopefully that makes some sense. But one person that did get a bonus, and we reported this on Gamecock Central from that Board of Trustees meeting, Joe, was Sterling Lucas. And as I reported on Friday night, there were two reasons for that I was told. And I put in the report. First, there was a handful of NFL teams over the last couple months, especially over the last couple weeks, that have been interested in hiring Lucas, hiring him away from South Carolina to bring him back to the NFL ranks. Most recently, I was told, was the Baltimore Ravens, a place that he worked at for several years. So that combined with the fact that Lucas played a big role with being able to help bring in some talented players over the last couple of years. Helped with the Nicholas Harbor situation. Helped, of course, with Dylan Stewart. This was a way of just saying, hey, we appreciate what you're doing. We don't want you to go anywhere. Thank you. Here's a bonus. You've talked about it before in the past. I know we've actually talked about this before. What can you say about the job Sterling Lucas has done? And with South Carolina, and that's not to say anything about the other coaches, because there's been some coaches that have done some good things over the last couple of years. But the importance of making sure you don't lose a guy like this. We've talked about Pete Lembo in the past. South Carolina, they threw a bag at him last offseason. Sterling Lucas is a hell of a coach. Hell of a coach. Just your initial thoughts on South Carolina making sure not to lose Lucas, at least for right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, I think he's huge in the development of, this South Carolina defense and program, right? You talk about, Shane has talked about trying to tap into the roots of what this program is. And part of that is a mean defensive line and mean defensive ends. Sterling Lucas is one of the best defensive coaches in the industry in football. And to have him at South Carolina, number one, recruiting, but also to have his expertise in the defensive end room is huge. I mean, he was with the Ravens for over a decade and then comes home to South Carolina. He's an Orangeburg native. I believe played at South Carolina State as well. So Lucas is home, right? And, you were going to do everything you can to keep Coach Lucas home. And, shout out to South Carolina for being able to do that because he wants to be here. He's at home. He's working with Coach T-Rob. Travion Robinson was another, big Robertson, was a big addition to the staff as well. They get together really well. And it's like the Bash Brothers, watching them, coach at camp and that kind of thing and recruit. It's fun to watch because, they're having fun with it. And obviously Coach Lucas wants to stay here. So it was big that you secured him because, like Mike mentioned, he's been huge in recruiting. And when you have, and also it's part of the pitch too, when you try to make up ground on NIL, part of that pitch is we are going to get you to the NFL. So when you have a coach like Sterling Lucas, who has spent decades in pro ball and coached some of the best defensive players we've ever seen with the Baltimore Ravens, that experience is so valuable when you're trying to, necessarily gain ground on areas where NIL can't compete. So, I can't say enough good things about the extension because he is such a big piece. And, you want your defensive line to be the core of your defense, rushing the passer and that kind of thing. So it's just a very, very, very big addition to staff. I think, one that kind of goes unsung a little bit throughout the grit and the grind of the year.
Well, I mean, look, when we talk about coaches, especially from the college ranks, especially at this level, when you're talking about SEC, Power 5 coaches, naturally, you're going to have to fight off occasionally other schools, the NFL, from taking some of your guys. Now, having said that, there will be cases where guys will leave. You look at a situation like Jody Wright. That's an opportunity to go out there and be a head coach. I mean, you can't knock Jody for that. Jody did a lot of great things. I know Craig mentioned that as well. Jody did some great things here. But this is an opportunity to help better his family. And that's the way he's looking at it. He wants to be a head coach. Here's his opportunity. There's going to be opportunities for guys at the next level. right? I mean, there's going to be guys that will occasionally leave for what some people will probably, and even I'm sure Beamer would say this, occasionally, lateral moves. And I think if you're looking at preventing lateral moves more than anything, that's where it starts, right? I mean, it's one thing if a guy wants to go be a head coach somewhere. It's one thing if a guy wants to go to the NFL. But a lateral move at this level, there shouldn't really be any questions as far as letting a guy leave, especially if you feel like he's doing a good job. So I bring those things up because in this case, obviously, this was not going to be a lateral move. This was going to be a tremendous opportunity for Lucas. Having said that, Lucas is doing some amazing things at South Carolina, not just from a recruiting standpoint, but he's also done some great things from a development standpoint. And when you look at that edge room in particular, and what South Carolina has, I mean, we've talked about the offensive line, the defensive line, not just the edge room, but the defensive tackle room, the trenches in general, and what South Carolina has been able to do from a recruiting standpoint, both from the high school ranks as well as the transfer portal over the last couple of years. What South Carolina has been able to do heading into this upcoming season, at least on paper, is very impressive. But when you look at that edge room in particular, in large part of what Sterling Lucas has been able to do from a recruiting standpoint, on top of the fact of what he's been able to do from a development standpoint, it speaks volumes. And you would like to think that, God forbid, Lucas were to go to the NFL at some point, that you're not going to be losing guys in that room. But I think you'd be naive just to have that wishful thinking. Comes with the territory. Guys sometimes leave, especially now more than ever. So to be able to keep Lucas, it's not just keeping a talented coach that can develop players, that can go out there and recruit, but he's also someone that when you talk to players, when you talk to people in that building, the players specifically in that positional room, but obviously players across the board that deal with them every day, but in that positional room that are with them more than anyone else, they think the world of them. And I'm not trying to scare people, but if Lucas were to have gone to the NFL, is that edge room on paper, again, I say on paper because it looks very talented right now, would it have still been as talented heading into spring without him? So that's something we're not going to have to worry about right now, and hopefully that's not something they're going to have to worry about for quite some time. Saw a question about Justin Stepp. Where was this? I want to bring it back up. Where was it? Cocky Joe said, is Coach Stepp gone, or is he going to stay? Stepp's here. I mean, I saw crap on social media the other day. I mean, we reported this on Friday that he was moving over to the tight end position. I wake up on Tuesday, or Saturday, excuse me. All these days are confusing me. I mean, you had Monday afternoon football yesterday. I don't even know what day it is anymore. People were like, oh, Stepp was fired. I'm like, what the hell what are people talking about? There was a press release that came out Friday night from the University of South Carolina that announced that Stepp is now the tight ends coach. On top of that, Stepp was out on Friday recruiting tight ends. Now, having said all this, and I said this on the message board on Saturday morning, is there always the possibility that Stepp could go somewhere else? Obviously. Okay. Is he thrilled about the position that he's in? Probably not. I know how much he enjoyed coaching wide receivers. But having said that, when you look at the big picture of it all, you're bringing in a very talented wide receivers coach who has had a lot of success at multiple places. I specifically was told about the job he did over at Georgia. And Cooley coming here. But on top of that, you talk to people that know Justin Stepp. And one of the things he wants to do ultimately, he wants to be a head coach. So even though this might not be a situation that a lot of people will look at, and maybe Justin Stepp feels this way too, where it's like, man, okay, I'm making this move up. It's going to help his resume out. It's going to help his resume out because now he's coached different positions. Now, again, you don't have to. That's not That doesn't mean you have to do it XYZ, coach, this position, that position, all the positions, check every box off as far as, okay, I have experience of coaching every room in order to become a head coach. Certainly not. But it will help him. So I say that because, number one, I don't know where the hell this thing came out about he's being fired. I think some people saw that, okay, Cooley's coming in. He's going to be the wide receivers coach. Man, that means that Stepp's gone. No. Read the rest of the friggin' report.
Yeah.
Don't just look at the headline and be like, oh, Cooley, wide receivers coach, and just make assumptions. Click on the friggin' link. My goodness. And if you're too cheap to pay the $1 to subscribe to Gamecock Central for the first month, I'm sure there's some free reporting outlet. I don't know, someone out there that's credible. But my goodness, go to South Carolina's athletic page. It had a press release, for crying out loud. So I say that, Cocky Joe, not directed at you, but bottom line is, as of today, Justin Stepp, he's still with South Carolina. He's the tight ends coach. He's been out recruiting this past weekend, tight ends, and that's where we stand. Is he thrilled about it? I'm sure he's not. But at the same time, too, this is a team that some changes are going on, right? Jody Wright leaves, and you're trying to figure out what can help this team be able to take that next step. And this is the decision that they've gone in right now.
Yeah, plain and simple. I think Justin Stepp is also another valuable, resource for your staff. Even though he's coaching tight ends, it doesn't, mean really anything. He's still in the building. I mean, he just switched positions. Coley's going to be a big addition to the staff. It's a fresh set of eyes. And after a while, right, you do need some kind of staff turnover, some kind of change to get fresh eyes on football, on your schematics. So I think Coley's going to be a big addition. And Justin Stepp, I mean, we know how good of a recruiter he has been so far. Mazio Bennett, he was really big in landing him, flipping him back from Tennessee. So that was big. And again, Stepp's a football guy. So to have him in the building in any way, shape, or form, no matter what he's coaching, is benefit. And he's helping Dowell out as well as, all of the other offensive coaches. But you want Justin Stepp in your building. You want him out recruiting for you because he's a really, 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 really good representative of your university and also, your football team and your culture of what you're trying to build. I think that's
the other thing too about Coley. The other thing about Coley, the more I talk to people in the coaching world, and when I say the coaching world, I think a lot of people know this by now with me. I'm not talking just about South Carolina. I'm talking about people that from my playing days, the coaches that have gone on up, right? They introduced me to different people, and I've had an opportunity to learn more about Coley over the last couple of days. They think he can make a big impact from a recruiting standpoint, especially with the territories that he's had success in. He's very familiar with the Florida area. He's very familiar with the Texas area. Certainly, we know when it comes to recruiting, from a hotbed standpoint, those two places produce a lot of talent. You go back, of course, during the Spurrier days when Shane Beamer was here for his first stint as an assistant coach, and the job they did in just around that time period, even a little after when Shane left, they did a really good job. They did a really good job of being able to get into Florida. So I think that can only help. Certainly South Carolina's had success in different areas. You think about the pipelines they've been able to create in the DMV area. And Craig mentioned specifically the Miami area. I mean, being able to build those pipelines, it feels like with Shane, with what we've seen from the players that they've recruited over the last couple of years. And obviously things happen, right? You look at the Pup Howard situation, like things are going to happen, especially in this era of college football. But having said that, what they've done, at least as far as when they have recruited players and they've been able to get commitments, and whether you want to keep Pup Howard or you can just take him out, it's not going to change what I'm going to say here. A lot of the success they've had has been in that Tampa, Jacksonville, Gainesville area. So they've had success there, but to piggyback off of what Craig's saying, being able to continue to work your way down the peninsula, work your way down throughout the state of Florida. I mean, Florida is just a massive friggin' state. So the amount of talent there, I mean, it's not short, right? I mentioned Jacksonville and Gainesville, but they've had success even working their way down to Tampa. Can you tell I'm not from Florida? I'm saying Tampa's right next to Jacksonville. Yeah, that's why geography wasn't one of my strong points in school. But my point being is that's been one of the things they've really focused on. They have had some success with Tampa. It feels like it hasn't happened as much in comparison, certainly, going back to the time period of when Spurrier was here and when Beamer was here right away. But again, they've had a lot of success going into different areas, DMV being one of them. Another thing, too, that I want to mention as far as what's going on with the hiring process to bring in a new running backs coach. As we sit here right now, the deal is not done yet. But as many of you probably saw the reports over the weekend, we put something out ourselves on Gamecock Central about where things stand for South Carolina. Marquel Blackwell is the name to keep an eye on. Where things stand right now, at least the last I was told, and this goes back to even last week, the big thing was just being able to get the contract taken care of. You know, there's things from Blackwell's standpoint, because of the fact that he's getting paid still by his former employer. They're just trying to go over, the formalities, take care of it from a logistical standpoint from the contract. That's what I was told on Friday, what was slowing things down. Now, Chris Clark put out an update yesterday on Gamecock Central that Auburn had also been in communication with them. If you want to see more information, head on over to Gamecock Central and you can see more of the specifics that Chris has for you. But I bring those things up to say that, if this gets done tonight, which it very well could, from what I was told, because you go back to last Friday, I was like, all right, what's the earliest this could get done? It could get done as late as tonight, as early as tonight, but it also could drag into next week. And the fact that it was a holiday yesterday, I think some people will look at it as being, wait a minute, it's Tuesday now. We heard this guy's name on Friday. What's going on? Remember, there was a holiday yesterday. So that slows things down a little bit too. So wouldn't be shocked. And I know it's real easy to be like, okay, at the earliest now, but it could happen today, could also drag out into tomorrow. But I would be shocked. I would be shocked, especially if it is Blackwell, if everything goes well. I would be shocked if this deal doesn't get done by the end of the week. I would be absolutely shocked. Some things to add to that, because we mentioned Newland Isaac, the running back coach over at Liberty. That was a name that we first reported about a week ago, and that was a name that was starting to pick up more steam. From what I've been able to gather, Jamie Chadwell did what he could to make sure that Isaac wasn't going to be leaving. So what exactly that entails, is that a promise in terms of certain, obviously he's a co-offensive coordinator, but is that some type of promise made, or, hey, you do this or whatever the case may, hey, we're going to get you an incentive for, I don't know the specifics, but that was what was relayed to me. So if that answers some people's questions about that, because certainly that was a name that had a lot of steam behind it for, I'd say, about a week, really. And Friday night, Lou Bajak of the State newspaper, and Lou does an outstanding job of covering high school sports, but he's very tapped in and locked in with a lot of these guys who go to other places but are from this area. So when I saw Lou put that out there, it did not surprise me one bit. Any just thoughts, Joe, on any of those things that I mentioned? Anything you want to just piggyback off of?
Nothing necessarily. It's coaching contracts. They're going to get it done. I voiced my opinions on the addition of Coley, keeping Stepp around. Again, I think it's such a valuable resource. And then obviously my opinions on Sterling Lucas. I think he's doing such a good job. I no really negative stuff to report about Sterling Lucas yet. Obviously it is our job to report both sides, but again, I am leaning a little bit because he has done so well and he's been so good to us at Gamecock Central as well.
Jay Diz, good to have you back on the program. So Stepp will probably do better with fewer players to coach. He had 18 guys last year, and we could only play 4 or 5 of them. Coley has done well at Georgia, getting a big wide receiver groups ready to play. I think more than anything, I think that they just need to be able to find some type of production in that room too. And I don't think that's necessarily, all on Justin Stepp, but sometimes just like in life and business, sometimes you just need a new voice. And, talking to people close to the program, they also felt that. But again, I think there's multiple layers to it. I don't think it's just looking at, okay, they're moving Stepp over. This is a demotion, which I'm sure some people will look at it that way, and that's fine. Have at it. But you have a very talented wide receivers coach coming in here, someone that Beamer wanted clearly on this staff. And certain things played out with Jody Wright leaving, and they decided to go in this direction. All right, Joe, we are sitting here at 2:49.
Do need to get
as
to
we
some
do
ads
this
as
show
well.
live, and I bring that up simply to remind folks who could go back and watch this later on that things obviously are constantly changing in this world of college football. But I think one thing, and Jay Diz adds a good point, Chadwell lost one co-coordinator and Willie Korn. He wasn't going to lose another one without a fight. Very good point, Jay Diz.
Mm-hmm.
I think, too, look, with the talent that's in South Carolina, and I've said this before, and this isn't to say that, coaching doesn't matter, because it does. But with the talent that South Carolina has in that running back room right now, to me, more than anything, it's whoever the hell the running backs coach is, just don't friggin' screw it up. I think that's what it comes down to more than anything. I mean, shoot, I'd make you the friggin' running backs coach right now, Joe. Just don't screw it up. I mean, you have too much friggin' talent in that room. Now, obviously, big picture. It's not the short game. You got to go out there. You got to recruit. You got to do all these little things to be able to continue to preserve that room, especially now when guys can just get up and leave year after year after year if they choose to. But I think more than anything, and obviously I'm half joking when I say you can put anyone in that room. My point being is if you do bring in Blackwell and he's able to have the same type of success that he's been able to have at the other places he's been at, if he can do those things and you already have a room, which again, no disrespect to any coach that comes in there and takes over that room, you have so much talent in that room. On top of that, as we've talked about before with the 16 scholarship offensive linemen that you have for next season, you should be able to run the football. Now, obviously, there's multiple layers to that too, right? You got to be able to throw the football. What does the passing game look like? Not just in regards to who the quarterback is, if it's Sellers or whatever the case, you have a young quarterback, but you have so much young talent, unproven talent in a lot of these positions at wide receiver. And I say positions, I'm going down 1 through 6 and trying to figure out what that 1 through 6 rotation will be like. So let's see. Way to go. Don't screw it up, Joe. Rocket left, rocket right, rocket up the middle.
Can't be too hard, right? Feed the rocket and then let Oscar Attaway get into open space. I think that's exactly what you need to do. Oscar Attaway, I think he's going to be the number 2 back. And he's going to be a support back for Rocket. Really hard to screw that one up, right? You just got to make sure they stay healthy. Knocking on wood there. I've gotten in trouble for that before too, but got to make sure you stay healthy and, just run, be mean, run like you hate the grass, go downhill and provide some support to this young quarterback, whomever it may be. So it's not too hard to mess up, Mike.
One other thing I want to add, and then we'll wrap this thing up. In case you guys have missed it, I would highly recommend heading over to Gamecock Central and taking a look at it. Chris Clark wrote this up, and I read it earlier today. And it was just really good to see some of the quotes here. But it was a Garnet Trust interview, and it's also in video form too, if you guys want to listen to Big Tree, Luedecke and Babalade. But in that Garnet Trust interview, talking a lot about the things that he learned last year. And as Tree has mentioned before, Tree, honestly, I mean, Joe, you remember, I'm sure, and I'm sure some of you guys who paid attention to press conferences throughout the season remember, Tree, when he was in that press conference room, I mean, he just lit up the room. I mean, he's going to be a fun soundbite, but he's going to be just a great person just to listen to, especially if he's able to have continued success moving forward. But I would highly recommend checking out this interview. But there's one thing that really stood out to me, and he's mentioned it before, but it was this quote, I was very nervous, but I think after a few snaps, I was like, okay, I can do this. I could get out there and get the hang of it. I know that sounds so simple. But when we look at where South Carolina is right now, and again, in a perfect world, do you want to have 2 true freshmen having to go out there and start in 8 games? No, you don't want that. However, that's how things played out because of injuries. Having said all that, I'm looking at the glass half full now. So I say that because of that, the circumstances that presented themselves with the injuries, not just Luedecke and Luedecke, but Trevon Baugh as well. And obviously Baugh had a tremendous freshman season, freshman All-American. And I'm sure Baugh would say the same thing that Tree said. They got the jitters out. They have the jitters out. And when you look at, and again, it's on paper, but the talent that South Carolina has, and not just the talent, but the depth that South Carolina has at a positional group where depth really wasn't a thing for them last year. Injuries certainly played a big part of that, but they have a lot of depth on the offensive line. And I think when you look at the talent they have coming in, it takes away some of that pressure. Some of that pressure, right? A guy like Josiah Thompson. Thompson doesn't have to go out there and start this year. Thompson doesn't even need to play. I was talking to an offensive lineman the other day, a former Gamecock offensive lineman, and he said, man, when I first got to South Carolina, the last thing I wanted to do was touch the field. I wanted to be able to get developed. I wanted to be able to go into the weightlifting room and get developed there as well. I wanted to be able to do whatever I could to not just preserve a year of eligibility, but be able to get bigger so that when my time came the following year, I could be an absolute monster and continue to get better to not just help South Carolina, but to continue to improve myself so that I can live out my dream of playing in the NFL. So I say that because certainly things change and things have changed with the redshirt rule. So a guy like Thompson, a guy like anyone, Blake Franks, go down the list, and it doesn't even have to be offensive lineman. It could be any position. They can go out there and they can play at least 4 games. I say that to say, and I think so many people got so caught up with this, even with some of the 5 stars last year. There's going to be outliers. There will be guys that will play right away. But if they don't, my friggin' goodness, relax. They're freshmen. This isn't a friggin' video game, just throwing guys out there left and right and just playing. So I think more than anything, with the talent that they have, I hope we really don't have to see Thompson this year. I hope we don't have to. Now, if we do, 2 things. One, he just could be playing at a level where it's just like, all right, it's not even worth waiting. Let's just throw him in there. Or it's because there's some talented guys you've been able to recruit that are ahead of them, and you're able to slowly start to get that continuity that you desperately missed, that you desperately need after missing it last year. And then on top of that, you're able to get these guys ready, bigger, faster, stronger, more acclimated to the system so that next year and moving forward, they're able to feel better about themselves. So, look, I don't know how things are going to specifically look like going from left to right on the offensive line, because injuries, you could always move some guys around. It's not always about who's the best on the offensive line. It's who the best 5 that work best together. And I think being able to have a lot of the talent back, obviously starting with, and I say starting with, no disrespect to Vershawn Lee and some of the other guys out there, but looking at Trevon Baugh and Tree, these are guys that were thrown in the mix. And now these are 2 guys you're going to be trying to ride as far as trying to get the most out of them from their sophomore year on, because they've been able to prove it as freshmen in a situation where you didn't have a choice but to throw them in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think, Mike, you're hitting the nail on the head there with the offensive line. You have a lot of depth. And then if you look at how the offensive line has shaped up in recent years for South Carolina, it's been when you have a bulk of guys, that are just dudes coming in, just ready to compete. You have a bulk of those guys, and eventually a couple of them are going to bond together and, up their play enough to be in the starting lineup. And, they're going to forge a bond and be the starting offensive line for 2-3 years to come. I think that's the recent trend. You looked at the Eric Douglas, Jovan Gwynn line. I mean, those guys all came in same class or 1 or 2 classes apart from each other, got in the starting lineup and didn't give it up, right? So It's going to be really interesting. I think, the offensive line, the Great Wall of Carolina, if you will, is going to shape up here coming up here soon. You're going to have some, consistency in the offensive line for these next couple of years. And I think that should excite South Carolina fans, especially when you have characters like Big Tree, Trovon Baugh, Cam Pringle, Josiah Thompson, all those guys coming in. And you have a lot of just stud offensive linemen that are, meshing together, learning each other's traits, how they play together and all that. They're coming up through the process and developing together, right? And that helps with, close-knitness. And, eventually, as we know, for the position at offensive line, you need to know each other like the back of your hand, right? So being able to be as tight-knit as you are and come in with guys similar to your age that you're going to be, playing with is huge. It's a thing that you're developing. It can't go understated.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun to watch and see how things play out in that offensive room. Well, Joe, we are a couple weeks away. I haven't really months. I want to say weeks because it feels like it's getting closer and closer from tax season officially being here. We've been telling people all year, all off season, if you want to call it that, and now it's almost here. Tax season's right around the corner, and who do they need to call?
Absolutely, Mike. You need to call Liberty Tax for all of your tax needs. Tax ID is an uncertain feeling you get right before doing your taxes, but you don't have to go through it alone. The tax team at Liberty Tax in Irmo, Lexington, and Columbia will walk you through the process, clear up any confusion, and guarantee you'll get the biggest possible refund or your money back. It's tax time. If you're in a hurry for your refund, call on the tax team at Liberty Tax. They are fast, accurate, and guaranteed. On the other hand, if you think you might be owing Uncle Sam, talk to the Liberty Tax team to make sure you're not paying more than you should owe. They'll find every possible deduction for you. Locally owned and operated, staffed by tax professionals from your neighborhood. Open 9 to 9 on weekdays and 9 to 5 on Saturdays with multiple service options. Start through the Liberty Tax mobile app or through the desktop portal. Make an appointment or just walk in. Give a call to upload your tax documents. And when you come in, your return will be ready to review and sign. Give them a call on your screen right now. And for those listening, 803-462-5576. Once again, 803-462-5576 for all of your tax needs this tax season, Mike.
And today's show is also brought to you by our good friend Clint Hammond at the Movement Mortgage. If you're in the process of trying to purchase a home, you understand how difficult that can be, as well as right now and over the last couple of years, right? I mean, trying to figure out the lowest interest rate. Give Clint a call and he'll be able to help you out. His team does an outstanding job. If you don't believe me, just go ask Wes Mitchell. When it was time for him and his wife to buy a home, who do they call? They called Clint. When former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth and his wife Shannon, when they were going through the process, who do they call? They call Clint. So do the same like those two. Give Clint a call at 803-771-6933. Well, appreciate you guys tuning in. It's been fun. Spring football, before you know it, it will be here. It will be interesting to see a lot of the competitions in these rooms. I mean, certainly wide receiver. It's going to be interesting to see how things play out at quarterback, regardless if you feel like Sellers is the guy. Just simply, how does Sellers look being the guy? It'll be interesting to see the competition, D-line, O-line. We're going to have a lot of fun. A couple other things to mention. Non-football news. Basketball back in action tonight. Big one. Late one. 9 p.m. tip-off against Georgia. Women's basketball coming off a massive win last night. And in addition to that, we are officially 1 month away until Gamecock baseball returns. First game of the year, Founders Park, February 16th. Can't believe how quick baseball will be back in our lives before you know it. He's Intern Joe. I'm Mike. You appreciate everyone that tuned in tonight. If you are not a subscriber to the Gamecock Central YouTube page, why not just hit the little icon? Sign up, hit the little bell. You get a notification anytime one of these videos drop, and you'll be good to go. If you're not a YouTube guy or girl, it's all right. Maybe more of a podcast listener. Head on over to the Gamecock Central Podcast Network, where you can do the same. Both platforms are free. Appreciate, again, everyone that tuned in tonight. I'll be back at it on Thursday for GC Live Afternoon Drive. And one last thing. There were 13 Gamecocks that went into the playoffs. And I say 13 Gamecocks. I'm talking about players. I know that there's Dylan Thompson's out there working with the Texans, but I'm talking about players. There were 13. Now there are 5 players left. 5 players left trying to win Super Bowl 58. Debo, Javon Kinlaw, Keyshawn Nixon, JJ Anambare. Hopefully Anambare gets healthy in the rehab that he probably has in front of him. God bless him. And then last but not least, Jadeveon Clowney. Wanted to make sure I gave those guys some credit today. Shout out to those guys. We'll continue NFL action for you. Gamecocks in the NFL. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll see you later on in the week.